This video is focused on the particular issues of domestic abuse towards men and the rape of men. Sometimes people think that this cannot happen to men, because they are always the abusers and women are always the victims. But the truth is that both abuser and abuse can be of any sex, gender, or sexual orientation. An abuser is an abuser, and an abused person is an abused person, no matter the groups either of them belong to. There is no single face for abuse, and an abuser can look bitter, shy, or charming to an outsider. As a matter of fact, manipulation has a big role in abusive relationships, and a very manipulative person can also be very charismatic and seem harmless. If we value life, if we think that inflicting pain and humiliation upon anyone is fundamentally wrong, if we think that those in need should be helped, we need to accept that victims and abusers come in all shapes and sizes. That even the most robust, macho man is a victim if he finds himself in a situation of abuse. Empathy is a universal human trait, and maybe one of our most noble ones. Abuse is not an ideological issue, it is a human problem.
Is it really that big of a deal? I mean, how many men are victims? The short answer is yes, it is. In the United States, the NCADV estimates that on average, 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner. 1 in 3 women will be victimized by some sort of physical violence by a partner in their lifetime, and men are lagging only slightly behind with 1 in 4 cases. 1 in 5 of those will have serious injuries for the woman, and 1 in 7 for men. At the same time, domestic violence shelters are almost uniformly dedicated to women, and male victims are constantly refused their assistance and left with the only option of going to a homeless shelter, even if they are seeking asylum for their children. When it comes to the subject of rape, the numbers are less clear. The CDC's report has been challenged for a number of reasons, and how it works is a subject worthy of examination and debate in itself, but it is not the topic of this video. What is relevant is that the report was made on the premise that the term rape only referred to forced penetration with either a sexual organ or an object, with the category of made to penetrate as a separate kind of sexual assault. This is baffling, considering that, on the other hand, the survey was meant to elicit reports that did not fit the mold of conventional crimes, and it expanded this definition to acts where victims were coerced or unable to express consent. Even if we stick to the false idea that no woman could overpower a man, the methods of coercion and the inability to give consent are universal, so we should hold everyone accountable to the same standards. Moreover, like Kathy Young points out, when asked about experiences in the last 12 months, men reported being made to penetrate, either by physical force or due to intoxication, at virtually the same rates as women reported rape, both 1.1% in 2010 and 1.7 and 1.6 respectively in 2011.
Again, this is not a competition. Even if the numbers were not so close to each other, talking about this issue would be important anyway. But with some data indicating almost 40% of all domestic violence where males are the victims, and almost the same quantity of male rape victims, this problem cannot be ignored. At least, it calls for a reform on how we see the relationship between gender and abuse. And although the statistics presented correspond to the US, the problem is worldwide. Some of the countries that don't consider made to penetrate legally as rape include the United Kingdom, China, Indonesia, Singapore, Israel, Russia, South Africa, and Switzerland. To be fair, some of these countries punish equally what is considered legally rape and what is classified as sexual assault, but it still obscures the fact that males can be raped. And these statistics are not even considering the number of cases that go unreported based on fear of retaliation, a perceived bias in the system, or the internalized notion that a man can't be a victim or must enjoy being forced into sex by a woman unless there's something wrong with him, which is a source of concern for those who focus on this subject. The statistics are additionally impaired by poor understanding of the subject within society. For just one example, even some of the victims believe that their involuntary arousal or ejaculation during the attack were signs of consent, which is false, and often an assailant is even trying to bring these things about, as it symbolizes their control over the victim's body and helps to shift the blame, much to the additional stress and confusion for the victim. Remember, if a person doesn't consciously want it, it's sexual assault or rape, and it's not the victim's fault.
But what is abuse? Speaking more generally than sexual assault and rape, something that we must understand is that abuse, be it verbal, emotional, or physical, is mainly about control. It is based on the assumption that the abused somehow belongs to the abuser. Sometimes abusive phrases may even take the shape of reasonable requests or be expressed as insecurities of the abuser, but as long as control over a person is the main point of the things said, it is abusive behavior. As such, abuse can take many forms and will always play with your perception of reality. The examples we will provide are aimed to highlight common patterns of abuse, but are by no means a complete list of all the shapes it can take. It is more important to understand the general logic behind the abuse and the typical consequence to an abuser's actions than to try and make abuse fit into some rigid formula.
Physical abuse. The first thing with which everyone associates abuse is physical violence. But even this issue is more nuanced than many of us think. Yes, physical abuse primarily manifests as intentionally causing bodily harm, pain, or discomfort. It may be done directly, like punching, slapping, choking, biting, pulling hair, or even using a tool or a weapon. But it also may be done indirectly, like forbidding the victim from eating and sleeping, or forcing the victim to use drugs or alcohol, especially if the abuser knows about the victim's past addictions, or even restricting the victim from using medication that they need. Putting the partner's health and well-being at risk, like reckless driving, abandoning them in unfamiliar places, or preventing them from getting medical attention, is also a form of abuse. However, physical harm is not the only kind of awful thing that can be done to a person, and there are other, more subtle forms of abuse.
Control of information. The abuser will often ignore any kind of personal space and break any kind of boundary in order to gather and control information. They might go through a victim's phone, their emails, and every inch of the house, looking for anything that could be used to establish and maintain the abuser's power. They might lash out if something becomes password protected, or if something is moved out of the house. Phrases like, "How can I trust you if you're hiding things from me?" Or, "You were flirty with your friend 10 years ago and you didn't tell me. How can I trust you now?" Or, "Are you keeping record of what I did? You don't trust me?" These are common ways in which the abuser will shift the blame of their actions onto the abused. Sometimes, they will not even hide their intrusions in order to make their presence known and instill the fear of future communications being monitored. Trust is an important thing in relationships, but the abuser will often use this argument to exert control over the abused.
Isolation. Abusers tend to isolate the target of their abuse from any influence that might affect their control. This includes the victim's friends, family, online communities, or even their workplace. This might manifest in ways like the abuser being antagonistic toward people connected to their victim, and then framing them as the antagonistic ones. "I don't feel comfortable when you meet with your friend. They obviously don't like me." Or, "Does your sister have something against me?" The abuser will, in return, introduce the victim to their own circle of friends and family. In this scenario, it is a common occurrence to have the tables turned, and for the abused to be chastised on even slight offenses toward the abuser's circle, with things like, "I can't believe you didn't even bring a wine bottle to the dinner," or, "None of your friends talked to my sister, that was so rude." Jealousy, of course, is another way to isolate a person. "You're only her friend because you want to have sex with her and she won't give you the time of day." "I can't trust her intentions toward you." Or, the other way around, "Your friend made a move on me." This is often coupled with accusations of infidelity, which can escalate into physical abuse and destruction of property. With these tools, the abuser can make sure that their account of the whole situation receives little to no challenge.
Belittling. Belittling is often used to alter the abused partner's self-worth. The examples of this are abundant because they mostly focus on what the abused partner perceives as their self-worth and thus is deeply personal. Comments like, "Oh, you like cartoons? What are you, a child?" Or, "You know your favorite movie doesn't pass the Bechdel test, right?" are designed to hurt regardless of their truth and often operate on the basis of belittling a source of pleasure for the abused that doesn't align with that of the abuser by making a personal, negative assumption based on it. Comments like, "Oh, you're so far behind in life, people your age are earning twice as much as you," or "My ex used to take me on a road trip once a month and you don't even have a car," are ways in which the abuser belittles your work, your career, or your financial status. It is important to understand that many of the phrases presented can be seemingly benign or even reasonable. Even arguments are not necessarily abusive. After all, we're all people and in a relationship where both partners are trying to learn how to live with each other on a day-to-day basis. Some friction is to be expected and dealt with accordingly in all seriousness. In this aspect, context is paramount, and it is important to understand why some things were said in the broader context of the conversation. Was the allegedly abusive partner being supportive, offering criticism, expressing their own frustration, or attacking you when they said the things they said? Was it to derail from other conversation? Was it to diminish some accomplishment of yours? Was it said to make you feel inadequate in a moment of intimacy? Was it said to intimidate you from speaking about something in public? When you look back at your past interactions, is it possible for a pattern to start to emerge and for situations that didn't make sense in the past to start making sense under a new light? Now, we're covering subtle ways in which abuse might manifest, but, of course, they can take many more overt shapes. Humiliation based on your body, such as, "You're ugly, but I love you anyway." "Your penis can't satisfy me." "Do you really need to spread your legs when sitting down?" "You're lucky you have me. Nobody else will love you looking like that, and I can do so much better." "I hate your teeth," etc. They might criticize your clothes and buy you new ones to replace those they don't like. They might insult your intelligence and identity, saying things like, "You just think like that because you're a little slow." "Oh my God, you're so stupid." "You're such a loser." "If I were you, I wouldn't let anyone talk to my girl like that." "You're just being insecure. There is nothing less attractive than an insecure man." "Oh, you think I'm being abusive? You don't know what abuse is. You're just being whiny. Go ahead, call the cops. No one is going to believe you." Again, a lot of such phrases can appear in a normal, basically healthy argument within a couple or in a moment of frustration for one of the partners in it. Context is everything, and the phrases have their destructive power only when they form a pattern of purposely trying to humiliate a partner or to break their perception of self-worth. Humiliation can either be public or private, and the ways by which it can manifest are too many to completely cover. But as we've said before, this kind of belittling abuse is all about trying to attack the self-worth of the abused partner.
Threats and intimidation. Threats are a more overt form of control. They are meant to elicit the desired response through intimidation. Like with belittling, it can take many forms. Sadly, often these threats are not empty threats, and the abuser is compelled to act on the basis that a warning was stated before. They can include threats of leaving the partner or cheating on them if they don't meet the standards of the abuser. They can be threats of physical or social harm. They can be threats of calling the cops on the man based on a perceived bias towards females being the victims. They can even be threats of suicide or self-harm, as well as expressed wishes for harming themselves, which don't need to be as overt as, "If you leave me tonight, I will kill myself." It can be something more subtle, like interjecting the phrase, I want to kill myself." For couples with children, this is especially insidious, since there is a basis for threats of isolating the father from the children or harming the children. For gay couples, it can be threats of outing them to their family or in their workplace. For religious people, this could include the very real threat of isolating the partner from their religious community. They can be death threats, and, like we said before, it is not unlikely for the abuser to try and act on these threats. It is not uncommon that a threat is directed towards a third party, which can be family, friends, or even children. This especially is one of the main reasons people don't break their relationships with the abuser, as people who are abused can often see themselves fulfilling a necessary function as a human shield to prevent others from harm. Intimidation methods don't need to be verbally explicit. By breaking, burning, or throwing things, the abuser can send a clear message that they're ready to escalate to a physical conflict, or even more subtle, with intimidating looks and gestures. The same way that they can resort to breaking things to make a statement, mentioning a violent past, instances where they have hurt people before, are used to convey the idea that the abused partner can be hurt in the same way.
Gaslighting. Gaslighting refers to the many ways the abuser manipulates and controls the abused's view of reality. This can include deleting parts of a conversation, downplaying the abused, telling them that something is just part of their imagination, or that it's just their opinion, telling them that they were joking, that you're just being crazy, and that this is what being in a relationship means, and so on. The objective of gaslighting is to make the abused partner doubt their perception of the situation, and, once again, to control the narrative of that situation. When gaslighted and isolated, the abused doesn't have any other recourse to objective truth than the narrative that was presented by their abuser.
Sexual control. Sexual control is exercised when the agency of the abused partner's sexuality is diminished, ignored, or outright violated. The use of force is the most obvious example, followed by threats. Coercion is a common way, which can range from things like saying, "What? You don't want to have sex? What are you, gay?" to, "You don't want to have sex with me because I'm not attractive, right?" Pressuring the abused into having sex in ways and at times they don't desire, including but not restricted to unprotected sex, is also abuse, as is shaming aspects of the abused's sexuality, be it orientation or elements of behavior, for example saying, "You moan like a girl when you orgasm."
Financial control. Financial control can work in many ways, but is always about restricting agency over financial resources. This may happen by not giving access of money to the abused partner, depleting the savings of the abused partner, or spending their money carelessly. The objective is to restrict financial independence, making the abused partner more dependent on their abuser.
Blameshifting. When confronted about it, the abuser will tend to shift the blame of the abuse or downplay it. The blame can be shifted towards the victim. "I had to hit you. You were leaving, and there was no reasoning with you." Towards others. "He was giving me that look, and I got nervous." Towards their own history. "I'm a victim of abuse myself, so I get a little bit too defensive from time to time." On social norms. "If you leave me, you'd be admitting that you're a homophobe and that you see gay relationships as deviant." On mental illness. "You know I have bipolar disorder and sometimes you just need to let me have it my way." Thus, the abusive partner creates a narrative where they have no agency over their actions, and it is responsibility of the abused partner to react accordingly. As extensive as we try to be, this doesn't cover all forms of abuse. We've mostly talked about abuse, intended for establishing control over a victim, but not all domestic abuse is based on that. Sometimes it results from alcohol or drug addiction of the abuser or from their mental illness. Sometimes it's a product of conflict escalation. But what's important to understand is that the abuser will use any kind of narrative to perpetuate and justify their abuse. They will prey on your fears, but also on your empathy, your values, your guilt, your drive to do what's right, your shame, your best intentions, and your feelings towards them. In the abuser-abused dynamic, it is not about what's right, what's fair, or what's true. These are just the elements that will be used by one partner to subjugate another.
But after the relationship is over, the problem goes away, right? Problems of abuse don't confine to momentary suffering of a victim that ends as soon as the abuser is out of the picture. Abuse poisons lives and the surrounding environment and has long-term consequences. It can have wide-ranging effects from interfering with the victim's feeling of safety and self-esteem to impairing their ability to work and have regular income, as well as their ability to trust people. Abuse can cause anxiety and feelings of shame, produce anger and self-hatred. Victims of abuse are prone to depression and suicidal ideation, alcohol and drug addiction, illness and sexual dysfunction. They often show various symptoms of PTSD.
A lot of victims continue to defend their abuser and blame themselves long after separating from the abuser. They have troubles with forming new relationships, and the situation gets even worse due to the possible fear for safety and well-being of the children that may have stayed with the abuser. Speaking of the children, they are the party that is directly impacted by abusive relationship between the parents. Apart from victimization by witnessing violence and the probability of suffering the violence themselves, it impairs their cognitive, emotional, and behavioral functioning and social development. making it harder to connect with people and to get a proper education with prospects of good employment opportunities. Growing up in an abusive family increases the possibility to later perpetrate violence in their own relationships. Abusive relationships are not closed, isolated systems. They emanate toxicity into all spheres of life and into the lives of everyone in the vicinity.
To those of you who have suffered or are suffering abuse, we want to tell you that you're not alone. The reason why we are making an effort to put aside our differences and talk about these often ignored issues is because we care. This is our little and humble way to raise awareness in order to give you a way out, a chance for a better future. Next, we hope to discuss your options, either if you are a victim of abuse or if you know someone that's currently going through it. For now, just know that you are not alone.